Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Please hit the like button and subscribe and share because it really helps. So we're on the Druids now. Druids were the proclaimed sinister people of the Celts world, and one's often accused of having crazed mentality of fighting warriors. The stories of this sort of secretive religious cult, as they were called, they're in thousands and thousands, especially within the church. Druids were recognised as part of the higher political infrastructure of the Celtic society. In Caesar Gall campaign, he made no mistake in identifying these druids, and he identified them as key people in the Celtic world. By destroying them, he would conquer the Celts, both in mind and in spirit. It would appear, after an exhaustive study on the point, it did actually have some merit. Druids were consulted on daily decision making by kings. As such, they did have enormous political power in Tuatha provinces. In the historical events around Boudica, obviously I'm sure we all know who Boudica is, the rebellion of Boudica, both consulted with Druids. In legend, King Conchbo MacNessa consulted with Cathbad, and Queen Met consulted with her druid before she attacked Ulster. So there's a few examples of Celts consulting their druids before doing anything. However, regardless how history has, for the most part, demonised them, the real truth is they were, for the most part, just a scholarly mix of physicians, historians, lawyers, and bards. You know, what we see today, the lawyers of today and the historians of today, these druids were the people back then, what we would be like back then, I suppose. And some people still prefer that, actually. So where did they come from? Who were they? How was it possible for them to have created such a fascinating mystery around them? And then there's the most famous, Merlin, of King Arthur. And more importantly, were they really as powerful as folklore would have us believe? Once again, look at the archaeological evidence to begin the process of understanding the strange sect of the cults. If we start with numerous Greek historians of the Celts, there are virtually no references to the Druids of the Celts in the Mediterranean world. In fact, we find that even in Galatia, where St. Paul has written dozens of letters, again, there are no mentions of the mysterious shamans. In fact, the Tacitus travelled across Gaul into Germany. He too made no mention of the Druids either. Shunning of Alexandria travelled through Iberian Britain, c. 150 BC. He claims there were only Druids found in Britain, which is Britain now, but thus, in all the known records of time, from 500 BC to 75 AD, the physical evidence of Druids is sparse. Julius Caesar, turns out, is the first big source from which you start to learn part of the Druids of Europe and how they primarily existed, and it gives us a sort of a idea from where they came from. He, however, had the Druids restricted to Gaul and Britain and nowhere else. And this point is backed up by T.D. Kendrick in the book, his book called The Druids. In other writings, like Strabo and Poppaeanus Mela, there is a confirming reference from Julius Caesar's writing that the Druids' origin, or main centre, was on the island in Britain. Britain was by what we know from history, had several sources that would identify this place that had Druidic orders, many places upon Britain. Tacitus too made the reference of an island in Britain, And finally, look at one of the great Celtic legends, the Tambo. The training of Cochlin was the Druid island east of Ireland. Historians generally feel it was the Isle of Man or Island of Man. However, there's very little archaeological evidence to support this. It would seem that Anglesey of Wales is the most appropriate place in archaeological finds that you would say show evidence of the Druids, especially later archaeological finds like 1943 does provide some of the best proof of the Druids. The finds have confirmed that Druids go back in that region. I mean, as far back as like 1500 BC, I believe. Archaeological experts, for the most part, associate Druids with the thousands of stone formations across Europe, especially Stonehenge in England. If that's the case, then we know that two things come to light. The first one is that the stone circles of Europe were developments of the Umfield people. And the second is that formations exist primarily in Western Europe. Examining the burials of Hochdorf and the Princess of Wix, there was found little evidence of Druid rituals at the sites. In Denmark, with the famous Gunstrup cauldron, we have our first real evidence of Druid existence. Canunus, the famous Celtic god of forest, is clearly engraved on the cauldron. Thus, we know from the physical evidence the Druids' influence was from Gaul up to Denmark, and accepting the stone circles as another source, then into Britain and Ireland. This is one of those situations where the Celts migrated across Europe, so they picked up customs of the people they settled with. Based on the dates, 1500 BC, the Druids and Umfield cultural source would be very ominous, a very ominous assimilation with the Celts. It's from what you can learn and what's been culturally adapted, I say, it wouldn't be hard to believe they easily assimilated themselves into the Celts and became part of their society very quickly. The makeup of the Druids was not conductive of the Celtic world, especially in Hallstatt age. The Celts were nomadic people, and when you sort of study the composition of Druids, then obviously you could have easily said they existed in a permanent located society, and the Umfield were definitely that by 500 BC. As much as the Roman tried to dismiss them as simple shamans, it turns out they were anything but. In Caesar's writing, he later confirmed by Tacitus that it took 20 years of study to become a full Druid. What they studied, in brief, was astrology, history, biology, music, poetry, rhetoric, Brennan law, Ongham, and finally politics. To be able to study in such depth, they needed to be in a settled society, just like the Umfield people. And one more reason why it wasn't possible that the Druids could have originated with the mobile Celts. You see, if they were with mobile Celts, they wouldn't have had enough time to learn all that knowledge that they learnt. So it's believed that they settled into a society of cults, and the only society that really stayed in one place long enough was the Umfield people. The rest of them, they always moved, didn't they? You know, the stone circles of Western Europe and the British Islands were all built by Umfield people. Yes, Umfield people. They are not Celts in any sense at all. The Druids seem to have had an enormous amount of knowledge on the stones and their use, which only adds yet another piece of evidence to their origins. As much as some sources say the stone circle, like Stonehenge, were used for, well, rituals or ceremonial practices, it turns out in the latest studies this is not the case at all. The stone circles, in all the different sorts of designs, were all primarily burial sites. That's it. Further, in every aspect, they followed unfield practices and not Celtic. For example, in every stone circle was found the remains of a cremated body. Newgrange in Ireland is said to be one of the best examples of this. A dig of Stonehenge in 2005 also confirmed numerous graves of cremated remains. Only in one example was there an actual body found in the far outer ridge circling the stone formation. Druids have been placed at stone circles by various sources like Tacitus and Pomponius, I think, but almost nothing was said of their activity. It seems that the Druid had very little to do with the stone formation, thus the validity of recent evidence to the ritualistic claims is now dismissed. Remember that, guys. Dismiss that because it's a load of crap. There's no proof though yet, but it does seem that when the Celts did...
I don't know that.
That's my Alexa saying she doesn't know that, but I'm not talking to her. There's no proof yet, obviously, but it does seem that the Celts did assimilate the Druids to their beliefs. The Druids adapted and changed their processes of ritualistic practices, especially when it came to new burials and the burial sites. The Celts did not cremate their dead, but instead buried them. Further, the Celts did not bury their dead in huge monolith stone burials. Celts preferred to bury their own in basically unmarked graves or unmarked ground near a sacred centre like a stream or river, as in Hochdorf tomb Celts buried their dead with a large number of artefacts, including the diseases that they had. There'd be evidence of that. You would find that included, there'd be horses, they'd have the personal slave there in the grave. There's a lot you can find out through a gravesite, basically, a lot, even the diseases that they had, or dental issues, or things like that. When you sort of consider the length of training it took to become a druid, it's not really surprising they should become adapted to their new masters. In fact, they may very well have added a few of their own rituals in the process. The Yongam and stone carvings, they're most likely examples. Stone carvings don't appear in the Celtic world until 400 AD, by the way. Therefore, it's likely that's when the Druids started to make their mark on the Celts. Up until that point, bronze was the preferred material of religious or ceremonial art. Ongam is a notch marking letter system. It's seen on the edges of pillar stones. There are 4 groups of 5 notches. Ongam means trees in Gaelic. So each of the marks represent a tree. Each tree has its own importance, obviously. The oak tree is said to have the highest hour of them all. The shrub tree are said to be the least important, and some even considered they bring bad luck. As such, the way the markings are applied, it can be interpreted a simple message like the name of a place, or applied to a magical spell. As can be, you can look at a tree for markings, and you can tell each tree mark also stands for a letter. And this is how they formulated their words. They formed them this way. However, be aware, the Druids did not use these words in sentences. A single word was notched out on one side of a stone, and that's all there was to it. The importance of Ongam was for the most part ritualistic, and is still regarded in this fashion much today. You can figure out the rituals or divination works by simply understanding the importance of the trees to the Celts. And that's what we're going to do next time I return. Excuse me. We are going to do a bit of the Ongam, I guess. It's only right that we do. So what we are looking at basically is, I know people want to believe that these stone structures are Druid ritual sites, but it's not true. The more time goes along, the more evidence we find that they were the Umfield people that built those stoneworks, and they're actually probably their burial sites. You know, the Celts didn't cremate their dead, and there was cremated bodies, which the Umfield did cremate, and that's at Stonehenge, people. So, not saying they weren't used for simple rituals, but it seemed more of a burial site by archaeological findings. The stone monuments definitely indicated burial sites, and it seems it were the Umfield people, not the Druids. So, yeah. Thank you for listening. I do appreciate it, and many blessings.